Call to order. This meeting has been posted in compliance. This meeting has been posted in compliance with the open meeting law. Today, Charlie is absent and Blair Davenport is calling in by phone. And there are at least 3 members present, so a quorum is present. Okay. Now we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now we will open up to public comment. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. To comment during the meeting, members of the public may call 702-589-9629 when the public comment period is opened. And it is now open. Is there any public comment for members in the audience? All right. Then we'll wait just a few minutes. Okay, at this time, public comment is closed. And we'll move on to the agenda. For agenda number 1, for possible action, election of officers.
Chair, I'd like to nominate you to stay on as chairperson and Blair to stay on as vice chair.
Okay.
I'd like to second that.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Oh, okay. All right. Motion carried. Okay. For possible action, approval of the minutes of the August 25th, 2021 regular meeting.
Make a motion to accept the minutes as printed and distributed in our packet.
Second that.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. For possible action, presentation by Randy Hees of the Nevada State Railroad Museum, Boulder City, regarding the proposed museum expansion project. And welcome, Randy.
Thank you. I also have my assistant, Johnny Walker, is here today. Which is kind of significant because I have 6 more days before I retire.
Oh.
So at least in the short term and possibly in the long term, Johnny will be the representative for the museum. So the reason I'm here, about 6 months ago, Blair had raised a question very legitimately about potential historic resources in the railroad yard and whether various projects that we're going forward with might affect those projects. And in those questioning, she had done her homework, and she had pulled out a cultural survey of railroad resources that was done by the Bureau of Reclamation and the Water District to identify potential historic elements. The core of this, it was done in 2001, published in 2003. It was actually done by a gentleman from Colorado. And she had identified in that a series of possible impacted objects. So quick, before we do that, talk a little bit about what we're doing. The State Railroad Museum has been in the yard, and the yard runs from Buchanan to roughly Yucca Street, or actually a bit further west. We've been in a facility that was put together in 2001 and is a very minimal facility. We actually have a total of 200 square feet of public air-conditioned space, which in this environment doesn't work. So we are looking at building a new facility, primarily right now a visitor center, which is 9,000 square feet. There will be an additional, potentially larger equipment display building that'll be enclosed, and another open pavilion like the building we currently have for some of the more robust artifacts. We are through schematic design. We are funded at this point, we believe, fully. In addition to those 3 buildings, we're creating a linear park. Our site is about half a mile long from Yucca to Buchanan. The intent is trains are long and linear. We'll have trains throughout it. There are 2 benches. The upper bench, or northern bench, is where the railroad actually is. The southern bench is about 14 feet below it. It actually contains majority of the historic artifacts, which will be considered a public park. And so we're looking at this facility with a bike path through it. It needs an access road because you cannot turn left off of Boulder City Parkway into our facility. So right now the city is working on an access road project. So this is the building that we currently are working towards. This is a little closer view. Right behind, you'd be standing up against a small railroad locomotive if you were in that site. Interior view. So this is going to include some public space that could be used for meetings. It's going to include our ticketing, our store, and 5 interpretive nodes where we'll have a wall where we can do some interpretation that we can't in the current outdoor space. So this is the map and, in fact, the cover of the book that Blair quoted from. And so we're going to use that, and what I've done is I've updated the information from that survey to understand. I went and found everything mentioned in the survey. I also went and found other things, and we're making some corrections. So when the gentleman did the survey, he had access to the Bureau of Reclamation information, including the 6 companies' railroad. He literally walked from the lake edge where the tracks emerged and from the top of the dam where the government railroad ended, all the way past Railroad Pass, looking for everything from a culvert that went under the track, a pile of gravel, and on. He didn't have access to Union Pacific records, and so there were some errors made. So that, and when you put the history over the top of it and try to understand the way their yard was used, it really starts to come up. So we consider the yard as having kind of 5 historic phases. The first, September 17th, 1930, when they held a groundbreaking west of today's Interstate 15 on the railroad main line to start building the railroad. It was the occasion that the term Hoover Dam was first used at. The contract to build the dam had not been let. So that's the construction period. The railroad arrived here in 1930. By the spring of 1930, there was service. The depot came in late spring. During dam construction, this railroad would have been unbelievably busy. And it's important to note that we're talking about the Union Pacific Railroad. Union Pacific built from Las Vegas to Boulder City. Its tracks would end in what is today the northbound lanes of Highway 93 business, right in front of a site that they say they're going to offer storage starting in 2020, across from Albertsons. There was a second railroad built for the government called the Government Railroad that went from that point in front of the Safety First building, and then went down to the top of the dam through the 5 tunnels of the railroad trail. There was a third railroad built by 6 companies, about 17 miles long. It actually went into Arizona. They mined all the sand and gravel on site. The 6 companies railroad was abandoned as the dam was completed. By 36, it was gone. The government railroad was abandoned last used in 61 and was torn up in 63. The Union Pacific continued to provide very rare service into town until 1985, when that railroad was taken out of service and given to the state of Nevada as a site of a future railroad museum. After 1961, we get into, when the last power generating equipment was installed in the dam, and that's when we see this railroad just almost not used. It was used seasonally for sheep shipments. People would bring their sheep here, turn them out of cattle cars, and drive them down the El Dorado Valley for winter grazing. There was pipe coming in for gas development, but there wasn't much in the way of freight. And then the post-dam period, where it becomes a museum. So the yard was on the 2 benches, and that's kind of an interesting thing. When you look at how the yard was used, the upper bench was a 7-track transfer yard. By the way, the yard's sometimes called Summit Yard. We see that in the very, very early news releases. Almost immediately, the railroad calls it a transfer yard, because that's what it was. The railroad would bring up trains of about 40 cars, cement to make concrete, wood to be forms for the dam, all of the rebar, all of the equipment that was used in the dam, and it would be handed over to the government railroad to be taken down to the dam. And so that's the upper level. Today, only 3 tracks remain, because 4 of them were owned by the government, and 3 were owned by the railroad, and the government took their tracks up. The lower bench, on the other hand, contained town freight. It was dedicated to the town. So between Yucca and Buchanan, there was a building materials company, there were 2 oil depots, and there was the railroad depot with what's called team tracks, and that's Teamster tracks, and it's where somebody who didn't have an unloading facility of their own would unload. One of those tracks continued into town. It would basically go down through the pharmacy aisle at Albertsons, would go through the parking lot of today's Bureau of Reclamation Conference Center, and would end up on Railroad Avenue, and would go all the way to the water treatment building. So, and they were delivering chemicals. And according to some maps, there was another branch that would have gone across Nevada Highway, and that would have served a 6 companies warehouse. I've got that on one map. So we understand that the upper is transfer and the lower is really the commitment to the town with the depot. In the land area, okay, they went in. So what is left? Okay, there were some changes. One of the interesting things very much doesn't show up in the report, was actually there was a passenger line. They only allowed passenger service for about 3 years. It wasn't very successful. If you were working on the dam, you were hired in Las Vegas. You either drove your car up or you took a company bus. So there weren't many passengers. There was competitive bus service offered. By the end of 3 years, Union Pacific was offering bus service. And so they removed some tracks, and there's some evidence of that. So if we look at the upper bench, well, let's see, I'm going to look at a couple maps first. So here's that full map. He's got it sprinkled with letters. This is a really interesting map when you look at it. This is the one he used as a base. You can see how fat the transfer yard is with 7 tracks. But the interesting track, I'll go over here. This one, the interesting track.
You have to speak into the microphone.
Okay.
Sorry.
The interesting track is the one closest to the highway. And it's right, no, we're not getting there. It's closest to the highway. And that is the track that has all the things that might be impacted. But that is the leftover passenger track. They had cut it at Yucca Street and abandoned to the west. So if we go through our railroad yard, this is a good one too. This map shows the relationship of the railroad to the city early on. You notice that the railroad's outside the city. And that actually shows up in some of the businesses that the building materials company, the lumber yard, was on the edge of the city. And so here we are, kind of a map trying to talk about the resources that we did find. So starting behind Chili Jilly's is a white steel bridge. It's interesting in that it is a railroad bridge which is made of steel, but it's exactly a wooden design. It was wood until the early 60s. Beyond that, we have a derail involved by the railroad. It's there because we're on a hill, and they were scared that a car would get loose in the yard and would head for Railroad Pass at high speed. And that's still present. We have Yucca Street. Yucca Street is not present historically. It's a relatively recent addition. We have surviving today in our track the A2 and B1 switches. And these switches are the ladder track. They were built by Union Pacific. In our yard, the surviving track is about 90% original with close to 99% original ties. One of the things that we will find from time to time are date nails. And at the time, it was common to drive a nail into a wooden tie that carries a number on top, so you know how well the ties last. And we frequently find 1928 and 1930 date nails. There's some things that, information carried by the track. The rails were reused. They actually were rolled during World War I. They've been on a main line somewhere else. They've been used enough that they brought used rails here. We can look at things like how many ties were laid. The track was built to mainline standards. They were expecting this heavy freight. And our yard tracks are square, and what that means is the joints where the two rails abut are across from each other. And that means the track was laid in panels. So it was brought up, it looked like toy train track. They dropped them down, pushed them together, went on, dropped them down. And photos of the yard show cranes in use. Our rest of our track is not that way. When you get out onto the railroad, it is it's staggered joints. The east leg of the Y had been taken up. We did relay it in roughly the same place. There had to be some alignment because of street changes. Also on the upper bench is one of the artifacts I'll show pictures of, which is the base for the water crane. This railroad was built for steam engines. They need water. They didn't use a water tower. They actually had what was called a water crane. The lower bench is a little different. Starting at what we call the A1 switch, which is behind Chili Jilly's. We use that switch today to come into our shop building. That switch was the passenger switch and came down around the current shop building. And if you look behind the Taco Bell, there is a railroad right-of-way that you can see. We'll see pictures in a moment. That fill is flat-topped to the west of Yucca. To the east of Yucca, it's no longer flat-topped. It was informally recontoured by business owners with bulldozers because before we built the rainwater runoff system, they would get flooded, and it was their attempt to build a dike. And so they've truly destroyed it as a historic artifact. Then there is a concrete pad. This was one of the pieces that Blair had asked about. It has knee walls, about 25 inches tall, some steel posts. In the Swigert report, it was said to be the Union Pacific maintenance facility. That was a misinterpretation. Union Pacific did all their maintenance in Las Vegas, downtown Las Vegas. Their yard was right across from the Plaza Hotel in where the county building is today. It was Boulder City Building Material Company, established by the gentleman who would go on to build the hotel in town. And he wanted to do it, and he built it at the edge of town. I have yet to find a photograph of it. Talking to some people who grew up in town, they believe the lumber yard itself was actually where Dairy Queen is today. Then there's two buildings. One is now the Monster Museum. That is the home of the oil depots, and there were two. Union Oil and Chevron both had oil depot operations. They would receive gasoline by tank car. They'd receive lubricating oil and barrels of other things by boxcar. The two companies shared a yard. I think it's important to note it's directly across from the airport. They very well may have had a pipeline under the street to serve the airport. The ticket house in particular, tiny little building with a double roof, survives. The one warehouse with its ventilators is original. The Monster Museum is actually a new building, as best I can tell, on the side of the vertical tanks. And then as we continue to that nicely red graveled corner of Buchanan and Boulder City Highway, that's where our railroad depot stood. It was a very, very plain, we'll see pictures of it, building. It's now at the County Museum in Henderson, so it is preserved. When they did the recent Boulder City Parkway improvements, they used that as their storage yard, that site. And during that, we went and looking for artifacts, and we found a few railroad ties. We found no foundation for the building. So with that, okay, this map actually shows the location of each of the things that we found. Okay, so items 1 and 2 are the industrial area. So that lower photo with the blue tent, that is the lumber unloading area. We don't expect to affect it. The new roadway going in will come up against it, but it won't require us to go past the wall. It's currently used by our live steam modelers who build railroads that run on 7.5-inch gauge. And when you're looking in the upper picture, you're looking down to the oil depot. So in that area, there was 1 or 2 tracks where there would be an occasional freight car. There's virtually no trace of them anymore. Okay, this is my item 3 on my map, and this is the dirt mounds. Okay, so we start on the upper, it's actually flat enough, it's about 9 feet wide on top. Ultimately, in our planning, we want to extend a piece of the River Mountain Loop Trail from west of the Veterans Home, across in front of the Veterans, cross Veterans Boulevard, come across our tracks, and then go between our tracks and Highway 93. There's a spot it has to cross on a bridge, and then come down and through our site. It became part of the park development. When we talked to biker people, we found out they all wanted to go to Starbucks. And that road would be really helpful. From that, RTC did a bike study and said there actually was a need for it. So we're continuing to do that project. But ultimately, the bike path will come down the railroad right-of-way. So we're going to have a little bit of rails with trails. Okay, so the water crane. This is the thing that I suspect is most likely to be lost. We've got 1939, we've got 3 passenger trains in. The Masonic lodges are having a convention in Los Angeles, and they want to come visit Hoover Dam. So there in front is, in fact, the water crane. So the 2 lower photos to the right is about the same angle, and at this point the water crane no longer has its relationship to the tracks that once were there. And a photo of it, and it's a concrete slab with 2 holes in it. You can see where they've cut things off. So this is a piece of history we might lose, whether or not we would want to try to move it somewhere else. We don't believe we can make it operable if we wanted to, because much of what goes on is in a vault underneath it, and that equipment is apparently gone. This is a great photo. This is from the Fredericks brothers, but it kind of gives you an idea. The railroad is in the lower right-hand corner. That's our Y. The depot's just there, and you can see the relationship to town. The depot itself, a couple photos of it, and there it is now in Henderson at the County Museum. I love this photo. You're looking towards town with the railroad depot, and it's hard to see, but there on the right-hand side is the station agent's house and a transfer building. Station agent had his own house. The freight agent had a house. Those would now be in, right as you turn left off of Boulder City Highway and go down to the dam. I think they would be on the northbound lanes. And that's about what it looks like from that same picture, the angle today. So we've lost those historic resources there. Our planning is to put the parking lot of the museum on this site. Parking lot, a plaza, with some plantings, make it a welcoming thing. Right now, it is just gravel. Again, the building that you would be going to, and then the historic railroad track, which is one of the most historic features we have. You can see the crane in the lower photo. And the upper photo is kind of interesting. It's a little washed out, but you're looking at Boulder City. There is nothing there. This is, the railroad got there. The boxcars on the right are living quarters for the workers who are building the railroad. And back to this. So, can I answer any questions?
You said the funding was already in place?
Yes, so we initially got a tour. We are part of tourism. We're also part of historic resources. So the SHPO is under the same department we are. But we were initially given a $470,000 grant to design the visitor center. It turns out it costs $1.5 million to design a visitor center. So we had to go back for more money. We were given $25 million in bond funding in AB 84, which was the renewal of the Conservation Bond Act. We have, in last legislative session, been given $1.5 million of that to finish the design of the building. The city has received 2 grants, one for design for the road, and that is essentially complete at this point. I don't think they've gone through schematic review, but it's complete, and $5 million from RTC to build the access road. We've had a series of smaller grants, primarily from the county, that were used to do the bike trail planning, but also we've got in place enough to do the trailhead for the bike path. And bike paths very traditionally are done, you get a little money and you build a few feet. You get a little money and you build a few more feet. So we're on that program right now. There was an attempt by people at the Department of Tourism to get some of the federal money, which is currently being distributed, and point some of it at this project. Because if we don't spend our $25 million bond money, it can go to a different museum. It has to go to us first. We have to build before you can distribute it elsewhere. But they're trying to do that. So we are, with the city recently, has put forward $200,000 to design the park component of the lower bench. So that'll take it through schematic review, which is a really critical, in architecture, they keep calling out percentages of design. Our current designs for the park are something less than 5%. They were done with a grant from the railroad volunteers. Actually kicked in 10,000, museums kicked in 13, and we were able to do that. But that doesn't give us what we need to be able to build a piece of it. So now with the city money, and that's going to be a playground component, it'll include the live steam component. There is a plaza that could be used for various public events, maybe a farmer's market, and some parking. One of the components of the road, by the way, that's critical is an incredible amount of parking. And that parking will not be specifically for the Railroad Museum. That parking is for the businesses that front on Boulder Highway that don't have enough parking. And so at least Vinny's Pizza will get a driveway in the Monster Museum between them, so people could approach from that road or leave, go out and park behind them. It'll have pedestrian access. So it's going to make the businesses along that corridor much more successful.
So when do you anticipate the visitor center being started?
So we are going back into design on October 6th, it appears. And that'll be to finish the design. That finishing the design is about a 6-month process. So, because we have what we call schematic review, we're there at that. We then go to the next legislative session to get our next piece of the money. And in projects like this, you design them first at a state level, and then you come back to ask for the construction money. So the current process will take it to biddable documents. The next process is after we get the money, and of course the state legislature says we get it, it gets signed by the governor in June, the money is not available until November, then you can go to bid, and we have a 60-day bid, and then it's 1.5 years to build. And that will be the visitor center and parking lot. We still won't have the display building. We won't have the pavilion. I suspect the total build out will be closer to 7 years.
You've done a remarkable job.
It's wonderful, retiring, but I'm leaving a wonderful legacy in a museum. And they say I can continue to participate with the architects, which is a blast.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question? This is Blair.
Yes, Blair.
Hi, Randy. Congratulations on your upcoming retirement. Much deserved. And I had a couple questions. One is, in regards to the features, the artifacts, such as the water crane, concrete base, and other sites there, I guess my question is then, those were potentially eligible for the National Register. I believe that's what was written back when that report was written. So do you guys have to document those sites and submit those to the SHPO to determine whether they either are or are not eligible for the National Register? And if they are going to be demolished, do you have to come up with some kind of mitigation for that?
So, okay, of the artifacts that we've identified, there's a couple things. One is, have they lost their integrity so for example, the upper half of the dirt passenger line still has its integrity. It still says I'm a railroad line. And the intent to use it as a bike path route will be continuing to stay in transportation and will actually probably preserve it. But the lower part, once across Yucca, is now a pile of dirt. It was recontoured informally and I believe, has lost its historic integrity as such. And there will still be a small dirt berm, but there's just nothing there, unfortunately, to tell you what it was. We're not touching the foundation. We're leaving the building materials unloading area intact, and we'll have interpretive signing on it. And if anybody can come up with a picture of that place, I would love to see it. We have been looking. We're also looking for the site of their retail yard, which was on Boulder Highway. And like I say, the person who I most trust thinks it was about where the Dairy Queen was. Probably the thing that's most in danger, but is the architects are aware and are trying to work around it, is the water crane base. And the problem is that isn't just a little concrete slab. Underneath it are 2 vaults. It's a standard Union Pacific design for which we have the drawings. And you can't just move it. It's a monster. I've documented a couple others. So that's something we'll document and probably put an interpretive sign somewhere there. We probably will eventually need a water crane, so we would use the same design elsewhere on site. But again, it's literally a concrete hunk of concrete that you could not build on again. So, yeah, and yes, we do submit to the SHPO's office. We've had discussions with them already, and they seem to be comfortable with us simply photographing the remains and including photographs and documentation of where they were. But like I say, most of the things we've identified get to stay.
Great, thank you. And then my second question is regarding the visitor center. You said it was a schematic at this point. And I'm curious if there is an opportunity to provide, I guess, some details that would make it maybe a little bit more in style with Boulder City, or
So there are.
tweak it a little bit, and maybe, and I'm not looking to rebuild, the Union Pacific Depot in Las Vegas or, elsewhere. I'm not looking, to rebuild what used to be the depot or the passenger depot there, but what the schematic seems, I guess it could be refined a little bit to be more in style with Boulder City's architectural history.
And so there's some things that we're looking at doing on it, and much of it is changing the massing around the doors. And so if you think about the two intake towers at Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam, they're high Art Deco, and we have two wide columns on each side, a wide column on each side that can have some of that. We have included for the architect, we put together some things. Union Pacific was very big on putting a large letters across the top of depots, and we're looking at doing that. We're looking at some details like a depot clock and where that would hang, graphics that are consistent. We did, early in the process, actually go through a design that would have looked like the Las Vegas depot. And that depot lost out during the design competition for several reasons. That 14-foot change in elevation is a real challenge because we have to get people who will be on the parking lot up 14 feet, and we actually have to get them another 43 inches because we're going to load the trains at floor level. So instead of having to go upstairs, you'll go across a bridge. And that in that challenge, the Art Deco version was going to have an elevator. And the lifetime cost of an elevator in a state building is really challenging. It also limits your throughput. Where this building is designed with actually ramping going up, and they're not ADA ramps, they're actually inclined sidewalks. So they're below ADA ramp rise. So we're doing that. Most of this doesn't show we've been discussing which locomotive ends up in front of the building. We think it's going to be the one from the test site, the tiny one that was part of the nuclear rocket program. It was originally going to be the government railroad locomotive that we have in our collection. But recently we were able to acquire an original dump car from 6 companies that was actually used. And so those two are now coupled together and shown together because they both are original pieces that were of this place.
So back to the visitor center, are you accepting suggestions or
Yes.
ideas of?
Yes, there will be a public process. We've already had 2 public meetings now 4 years ago when we were in the last process. There will be a couple of public meetings with the architect. I know John Walker is really concerned about flow around the building and would like more storage than it has. So we're looking at things like that, and the public would absolutely, there will be at least 1, if not 2 public meetings. And there's actually a discussion, because the next process includes an interpretive plan, of presenting the draft interpretive plan for the building, so you'll know what's going to be inside it.
So how does the public know when those public input meetings are?
So we will be posting them, much like we did the two road meetings, the one of which you attended. So that we go through the city and have them post the meetings for us. And then we also, the last time we actually did one of our meetings on a train ride, so we could take people from Yucca Street down to the side of it and show them the new bridge. For those meetings, I actually walked Boulder City Highway and invited every business owner.
Great. Well, thanks, Randy. I guess this is a question for staff, city staff. Whose office puts out or is working most closely with the Railroad Museum?
It's really a combined effort between Community Development and the Public Works Department. Obviously, the Public Works Department is currently leading the effort with the design on the road, and will be working on eventual construction. We'll make sure to coordinate with the state regarding their projects on each of these aspects as they move forward.
And
Okay,
Blair,
thank you.
Blair, one question that's a little confusing that we haven't figured out is we do have a basic written report about the artifacts that needs to have the illustrations of each of the spots added into it. But that then goes to the SHPO's office. And since it's two different agencies in the project, with the city building the current road and the state building its piece, whether it'll go under state letterhead or city letterhead or some combined letterhead.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead.
Hi, Randy. Thanks for the great presentation, and congratulations on your retirement. Good for you. I just had a quick question on over at the oil depot. You mentioned the little structure that was there, and did you refer to that as the ticket office?
Yes, and what they meant was truck tickets. So it was a loadout ticket.
Okay.
So that's caused some confusion.
Yeah, because I had heard something about it being a ticket.
Yeah, no,
so great.
it was, the building had two warehouses and at least two vertical, complex. And it appears that one warehouse was run by Chevron and one was run by Union Oil. But they seem to have shared a common ticket office. So a trucker would go, they'd pump 4,000 gallons into his tank truck. He would go visit gas stations, and so his loading tickets, and that's what that building is. It has the wonderful double roof on it,
Yeah.
which is a detail we see in early Boulder buildings to try to keep them cool in the summer. And it's one of the few that still has that feature. The employee housing on site all had it, but all of that is gone.
Great. Well, thanks for confirming that for me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Go ahead, Glenn.
Randy, thank you for the presentation. It's very informative. I've had the opportunity to hear you over the last few years talk about different things. I've had a couple one-on-one conversations with you. So the museum in our city are going to be losing a great treasure trove of knowledge and history of the railroad here. So congratulations on your retirement. Hopefully you'll be able to stay involved a little bit with the new museum. Just to be able to share all the knowledge that you have. You know, I found it amazing how much information you've got stored up there, and you just out it comes. So we're gonna miss you, and enjoy your retirement. Hopefully you stay working with us with the museum a little bit on your off weekends. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Randy, for your time. Okay, moving on for possible action, direction regarding the committee's goals and priorities.
Thank you, Chairwoman Graham. At the last Historic Preservation Committee meeting, the committee had asked to reevaluate the committee's goals. As you know, These goals have been reported out to the committee on a monthly basis for the last 2 years. It's a great tool for both the committee and staff as it highlights progress that are being made on the action items that have been identified by the committee. With the City Council approval in August of the Historic Preservation Plan, this is an opportunity for the committee to reevaluate its goals. And so the committee had asked to have this as a discussion item this evening. You will see in your packet, staff has prepared several documents. They include Holly, the pointer. What?
Oh. Hold on. I don't know if I got sidetracked as he brought it last.
Oh, that's okay.
I'll find it.
So for the committee's reference, in your packet are several documents. The first of which is the updated goals of the committee. This is the same document we've been providing monthly to show progress being made by the city on the committee's goals. You also have in your packet the goals that were approved with the Boulder City Historic Preservation Plan. You'll see that these goals have objective references, 1 through 5, a description of the goals, and then a ranking in terms of priorities. And as part of that plan, it identifies timelines of when to accomplish those goals. So to help the committee with your discussion this evening, staff has also put together a matrix which cross-references your goals and action items and how they match up with the Historic Preservation Plan objectives. So you could see where you have the same objectives with goals. You will see that many of the Historic Preservation Committee goals are the same goals identified in the Historic Preservation Plan and with similar priorities in implementation. In addition to that, Member Davenport has prepared an additional matrix, and I'll turn it over to her in a second to kind of explain what she's put together, but it highlights 5 priorities for the committee and references the historic preservation goals that are related to each of the new committee goals. And so what staff is looking for from the committee tonight is your conversation regarding revisions to your Historic Preservation Committee goals, what they should be and what the priorities should be, and taking into consideration the city's recently adopted Historic Preservation Plan goals. And so with that, Member Davenport, if you want to elaborate on your handout.
Sure. So when I saw the matrix that was in our packet, it was hard to go back and forth to the Historic Preservation Plan goals. So I just basically spelled them out. And I personally am a fan of the Historic Preservation Plan goals as far as how they are lumped together into 5, major goals. And then within each goal, there are the objectives. And then within each objective, it's either rated as high or, medium or low priority. And so I feel like the Historic Preservation Plan goals are what we should be going by. But of course, we need to keep track of what our previous goals were and how they fit in, I guess that's my question, and that is, a 2-part question. Can we abandon, so to speak, our previous goals and or incorporate them somehow into the historic preservation plan goals. And whatever goals we come up with this evening, do they have to go before the city council for approval? Or what is the process if we change or update the goals?
So I guess to answer the last question first, your previous historic preservation goals went before the City Council on September 24th, 2019, and they approved those goals. This was, of course, before the city had an historic preservation plan. It was important that the committee and the council and the community was all moving in the same direction as it related to historic preservation efforts. If the committee wants to go in a different direction than what the city council adopted with the historic preservation plan, then it would be staff's recommendation. We would need to go back to the council to have them evaluate those action items, because they recently approved the action items and the priorities with the historic preservation plan. I think that Member Davenport, those suggestion in terms of priorities as the 5 highlighted goals for the committee, as I've reviewed these, are in line with the historic preservation plan. And so therefore that wouldn't need to go back to the city council, because it is focusing on the same efforts that the plan is focusing on in the same priorities.
And so this is Blair again. I feel like our previous goals, I think we're going to be continuing with our previous goals, but they're just reformatted and or reprioritized in the format of the historic preservation plan's goals. And that's fine if it has to go before the city council again. But I just feel like we went through a really good process with developing the historic preservation plan. We had public input on the plan. The city council reviewed and approved the plan, and I just feel like it's incumbent upon the committee to follow that plan.
Okay, any other comments? Blair?
That's all my comments for now.
Okay, anything to add to Blair?
I would just like to say that I think if we don't need to go back to council, I don't understand why we would need to go back to council. As you said, Michael, the goals coincide with the plan. If we go back to council, there is
It's
always
gonna
the
be
chance that the council may not
Yeah.
approve of our goals that we already have established. I mean, if we don't need to go there, I don't think we should.
Yeah, it might be confusing to them since we just had that vote.
Yeah, it would be staff's recommendation that since the community went through this process, it included the committee's input and review of the historic preservation plan, that should be the guiding document to move forward over the next several years in implementation of those recommended action items. It's interesting to note, though, as I mentioned earlier, the historic preservation plan action items are similar to the existing historic preservation committee goals. And I think it's an acknowledgement of how the committee had established priorities of what needed to be focused on first, and then what followed. And so I think that input helped to guide the community and the process, and it makes sense to continue with those priorities in that order.
Okay. So, on page 19, I will have to admit, this was very small print for me to read, and when I was reading this, I was in very poor light. So, but this helps understand our priority, right? On page 19?
Yeah, so page 19 is taken directly from the Historic Preservation Plan that was adopted by the City Council in August.
Okay,
And so you can see there are references to objective numbers, and you'll note that they're not in order, they're not sequential, because what Nevada Preservation Foundation did is they put those in terms of priorities, what needed to be the most important, and which had the lower priorities. And as you can see on the right-hand side, they have laid out a timeline to accomplish each of those action items. And so what Member Davenport has done to try to mimic the plan is to show how your 5 goals would kind of match those overall objectives within the plan.
okay. And this is what's in her matrix, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Like I said, I haven't had a chance to read that thoroughly. But it just reflects on what page 19 says, right? With the 2021 through 2026. Right?
Correct.
Okay, just so I understand it, okay.
Now, staff did have one question. The committee's previous goals, it was goal number 4, included updating the guidelines and standards for the district. This has been one of the priorities. It's not exactly called out in the objectives. And as I mentioned last month, what's going to be important with the committee's goals is, one, you're communicating to staff prioritization and resource allocation. As I mentioned last month, with the City Council's approval of the fiscal year 22 budget, it allowed the city to move forward to hire a historic preservation consultant to help with the city's implementation of these goals and your goals. And so it's going to be important to understand what are the most important things for staff and the consultant to be focused on. Clearly with the goals, and I don't want to make assumptions, so I want to receive clarification tonight from the committee, but clearly with the goals, the first priority, as you can see through objectives 1 through really 2.1, is to address the city's existing ordinance changes. But the question staff has for the committee is that inclusive of revisiting the existing design guidelines that the city has in place? And this would be working with the historic preservation consultant and the committee to reevaluate each of those design guidelines, because they would be a key component to any ordinance change to the city code.
Right. Okay, so the guidelines then fall into 1.1 through 2.2, or 4.1. Those were high priorities.
Well, I guess staff's just trying to confirm if that's the intent of the committee.
Okay. It looks pretty vague as far as what's here. I don't want this to sound unusual or anything, but one concern I did have, and I don't know where it fits in all of our objectives here, but was Bullock Hangar. I really felt that it needs to be painted and it should be rolled into the budget for next year. Where would that fall? Would that fall into any of these categories?
In terms of preservation of the structure?
Right, yeah.
We do have under a couple of the goals that talk about identification of historic resources. So I guess part of these goals is these are overarching goals. You can have certain action items that would be tied into these, but you probably wouldn't get that specific in your committee goals and obviously the historic preservation goals. So just as a point of reference, it talks about identification of an existing historic preservation districts. That was
Yeah,
a
we talked
discussion
about that
item.
before. Yeah, that's in our overall goals.
Right.
Right,
Right. And so that would be one of the areas to look at with respect to the old airport hangar, is that designation.
Okay, because, yeah, I didn't know exactly how that would work, how we would recommend for it to be painted. You know what I mean? Where it would fall, because it would have to be rolled into the budget, right?
In terms of the capital improvement
Right,
plan,
yeah.
yes. Mhm.
Okay, so I wasn't sure where that would fit. That was something I was just thinking about myself, and, well, it seems to me that you've pretty much done the evaluation, and by, in the blue, making a priority, it says high priority through 2.2. So I think probably what we need to do is take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, these 7 items and decide, you know, where to go from there, because according to your research and study, those are the ones that have the high priority as to what we've been talking about all along, and the ad hoc committees and so forth. So I think tonight, maybe we should look at those and then kind of decide to help, just to help you plan, right? This is what we're doing. So, so let's just take it real quickly here. Number 1, update qualifications for designation listed in section 1127 of Title 11, Chapter 27 of the City Code. See, that's kind of vague. Could you maybe tell us what that is?
Yeah, and maybe to further help the committee, I would refer back to Member Davenport's recommendations.
Okay.
Because what she has accomplished is she's taken the plan goals and wrapped those into 5 overarching goals of this committee.
Okay.
So you can see with her document, she...
Now I see.
Yes, number 1...
Yeah, I see it now.
...is review and amend Boulder City's Code, Title 11, Chapter 27, Historic Resources, to comply with the current state and federal historic preservation standards. So that would be your number 1
Yeah, I
goal.
see that now.
Yeah.
I understand it now, according to this and what she's written here. So I just didn't have a chance to look at it. So are you guys in agreement with that then? What she's done here?
Most definitely.
Okay, how about you, Glenn? Yeah. Okay, so it's pretty simple. I think we'll just go with this.
Well, and just to confirm with the committee that, and I will defer to Member Davenport on her intent, that she's looking at the prioritizations being number 1, highest priority, through number 5 being the lowest, because generally what she's done is she's organized the historic preservation goals in a similar fashion. So just wanted to confirm the intent.
Yeah, okay, I'm looking at 5 now. Okay. So, go ahead, Blair.
Sorry, I might not have heard this correctly. This was organized as it is organized in the Historic Preservation Plan. So goal number 5, even though it's a low, it's just number 5 because it's number 5 in the plan, and it also happens to be a low priority. But if you look at let's see, goal number 3, there are no high priorities under goal number 3, but there is a high priority under goal number 4, 4.1.
Okay,
So
I see.
the goals are not in order by priority, the main goals. The priorities are within each objective. And you can see they're in parentheses. So 1.1,
Yeah,
it states the objective is, and then in parentheses, that's the high priority
yeah.
within goal number 1.
Well, I guess then with that, what's helpful to staff is knowing what are the highest priorities, so that's what staff and the resources should be focused on. When should we be working on those action items?
So you want us to help you create a timeline?
Well, I guess I'm asking the question, does the committee just want to follow the historic preservation plan? Because they have laid that out. They have identified which are the highest priority. They've identified the time frame of when the city should be focused on those from present day through 2026.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And as long as you guys think it's okay.
I'm curious to hear I would like to know what Blair thinks about that.
So what I guess I think I heard you say is if we were to continue with this matrix, it would just remain the same, and we would somehow emphasize what the high priorities are within each goal, and maybe that could be done over on the timeline side, or maybe some coloring of which ones are high priority and which ones are medium or low. If you're looking for, I guess, a way to more visually emphasize which ones are the high, medium, and low priorities, and what the timeline is. And so maybe on the right, the timeline would also emphasize what the priority is, because it's given a year sooner rather than the low priorities, which are like in later years.
Well, I guess, Member Davenport, does the plans matrix lay that out to the committee's expectation?
It does to me, but that's me. Everybody reads matrices different. So as long as I think the priorities are somehow emphasized, and maybe that's another column next to each objective. So let's say 1.1, there's a column to the right of that says priority, and it says high, and then the timeline says 2021 to 2022, and then you just do that for each objective, and maybe that would be visually more, that would emphasize the priorities and the timeline more clearly.
Chairwoman Graham, maybe if I can make a suggestion.
Okay.
Because I think what we're trying to accomplish, obviously we want a document that'll be clearly understood by the committee, by staff, and the community.
Okay, I think if we look back at your first matrix, okay, on page 20, the orange, and if you look in the orange matrix that the city prepared, that Michael prepared, okay, now you'll notice that we've completed our mission statement, we've completed the preservation plan, and that's the one that's just has been approved, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and that was, there was a lot of work that went into that, and I think we should be very encouraged by the fact that they did approve it, and so that's been completed. So if you look at this matrix in the orange that the city prepared at number 3, explore creating new historic preservation districts in Boulder City. And I think if you recall, a couple years ago, we had started along this path, but then the city manager wanted us to look into becoming a certified local government. So we stopped. And I'm not sure, Michael, if you were with us then.
I was.
Okay, okay. Because I know you were still a little bit new. So, so I think probably since we had discussed this a couple years ago together, we should go ahead and continue with that. So we want to explore creating new historic preservation districts. So that should be what our priority is. And then, of course, number 4, the ad hoc committee went through the previous code very carefully. And so we want to go by the recommendation, the ad hoc committee, and we want to amend existing codes and programs to achieve historic preservation goals and to comply with the CLG and SOI standards. And that was something that we really wanted to do. We wanted to be able to comply because when we do that, we can get grant money. Is that correct? When we comply.
We are currently in compliance and have benefited from CLG status through the grant that for $33,000 to do the Northwind survey. So we're continuing to be in compliance with that.
Okay, so then we want to probably go ahead, since we really, like I want to explain to you too, other codes that address signage, demolition, and demolition by neglect, blight and boarded up buildings, landscaping, building codes, new, infill construction, zoning, RDA. And so these were some of our concerns, and these were actually concerns of the whole community, and we didn't want to be like Needles, California, and be all boarded up, you know. And I'm just so delighted that Mr. Mays got on board with us, because since he's been here, we haven't seen that anymore. We have thriving businesses, and these businesses are looking very good, and they're successful. And we're glad to patronize our local businesses. So thank you, Mr. Mays, for all your hard work in that area. So we want to continue along that path. So I think pretty much we can just go right along with what you have planned for us, and we'll just do our best to help advise the council. What do you guys think?
I disagree.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
In that, I'm sorry, only in that you gave the example, like number 3 of our old goals, explore creating historic preservation districts. That's basically the same as the new historic preservation plan goal number 3.
Okay.
Which is identify and promote historic resources, including structures, landmarks, et cetera. And I mean, if you want to incorporate our previous goals somehow to emphasize what the historic preservation goals are, that could be done too, especially if you would like to memorialize all the great work we've done in the past, such as developing a mission statement, which doesn't fit within our current historic preservation plan goals. Perhaps that goes at the bottom to state, you know, these are what have been completed up to date that are outside of the historic preservation plan. But again, I want to emphasize that we did a lot of work to prepare the historic preservation plan. It got input from the public, and the city council approved it. And I just think it's our responsibility to follow that plan. If we want to like incorporate our older or our previous goals within the historic preservation plan goals, that would work too.
Okay. So Blair, okay, I hear what you're saying. So what would you recommend then that we make the first priority?
I guess my recommendation, let's just give an example for goal number 1 of the historic preservation plan, and that's amending the code. And Michael brought up that one of our previous goals was to update the guidelines or standards for existing or newly designated properties. That, in my opinion, is a sub-goal of 1.3 of implementing the certificate of appropriateness for alterations in new construction. Because in order to do the certificate of appropriateness for alterations or demolition, we need guidelines or the design guidelines. So I think that might be a good place to put that current goal that we have under 1.3. If you think that might work.
1.3 would be implement a certificate of appropriateness for demolition of individually designated resources and for excuse me? And for contributing.
Not demolition, alterations.
Demolition of individually designated resources and for contributing properties in a historic district. That would be above 1.3. Because it's listed here as a
No.
high.
1.3 is the certificate of appropriateness for alteration. And
Okay, I see
design
that.
guidelines are a component of the certificate of appropriateness process.
So you want to see that first?
It's a part of 1.3. There's a bunch of stuff to do in order to implement a certificate of appropriateness process.
Mm-hmm.
And developing guidelines, which is what Michael just talked about.
Yeah.
And where he's working with the consultant to work on those. I
Okay,
think that's where that goal fits in there. So if it would help to nest our previous goals under the objectives from the historic preservation plan, I could try that and come up with a different version where you
Okay.
would see each of our goals within the objectives.
I think that would be a little simpler for us to understand, don't you think? What do you think, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, they're telling me they think it probably would be simpler to understand if you could do it that way.
I can do that. Do you think that would make sense to city staff as well as the city council?
Do you think so, Michael?
Chairwoman Graham, I was going to make a suggestion. I'm happy to work on this and bring it
Okay.
back to the committee. What about color coding the committee's goals as Member Davenport has represented in the 5 areas,
Okay.
the 5 main areas,
Right?
and color code those to each of the plan goals. So
Okay.
you can see how your goals relate to them, but we use as the main framework the matrix that the plan provided.
Okay, I think,
Because it lays out sequentially highest priorities and when to accomplish them. And then we can update that monthly to show progress on each of those.
okay. That sounds like something simpler. Does that sound okay to you, Blair, of what you prepared here for him to color
I
code
think-
those?
Yeah, I think that'll work.
Okay, all right. I think we came up on it. All right, good. So then we'll go ahead and do it that way, Michael, if that's okay.
Yeah, let me work on that and bring
Okay.
that back for next month.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Well,
Thanks, Michael.
And I just wanted to ask, so Michael, updating the guidelines on 1.3, that's an appropriate language to add there?
What I'll do is try to make reference to that so that is clearly understood that that's the priority. And just to confirm again, the committee is in agreement with Member Davenport's 5 goals as presented.
yes,
We can always show accomplishments elsewhere in the document, but so the goals that have already been done, like the development of the mission statement and development of the historic preservation plan, you've accomplished those. Those, though, don't need to be in the matrix because they're done.
because we've already, that's passed, yeah.
But yeah, but you
And
can
we're into our new,
Right,
goal
but certainly,
process.
focus on where we need to go moving forward.
okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll be a little easier to understand. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. Okay, thank you, Blair, too, for your input. All right, we're moving on then to possible action, discussion on public outreach, utilizing local publications, city website, and social media. Okay, I think it was mentioned in here that we would be working on a new video, and I did want to update the committee and the city on what we worked on. So Ray and I met together on the video presentation on city-owned buildings, and we identified 7. And that's the LA Water and Power Building, the Water Filtration Plant, Bullock Hangar, City Hall, Police Department, Park and Rec Building, Water Tank. And so what we're gonna do is Ray's gonna find pictures of each of these buildings at the time of Hoover Dam So that was right, 1930s, so far, 30, 31, right in there. When they were built, and by whom they were built, like the architect, and then how are they currently being repurposed? So he's gonna put up on Facebook people that may have lived here during the time of Hoover Dam and have some personal stories about some of these places. For example, I think City Hall was the elementary school, wasn't it?
Yes.
Oh, did you have a question, Susan?
Yeah,
Okay.
when you said, I'm a little confused about, you said, you're going to be posting them on Facebook? On what Facebook page?
Just looking for stories, however.
Oh, you're going to be posting requests for,
Well,
Input?
personally, I will put out an appeal for people that might have a personal story about any one of these buildings for one of our projects, but does that have to go through, like
Committee?
is that something I can just go
Or
online?
does it have to go through Lisa LaPlante?
Well, again, I think as we talked about last month, any individual member of the committee can do research on their own. And certainly what you ultimately end up doing with that product, that's what we can reevaluate,
Yeah.
whether that has to be a committee approval or not.
Right, the end product would be what would be submitted to you, and then you would then approve it. to go-
Yeah, depending on the format and how that's distributed, yes. But yeah,
Right.
certainly you can, as an individual member of the community, make appeals, and you're doing research and trying to find out information about buildings and history.
Yeah. So, and what the point was, is we'd like to be able to have the public be able to press a button and see what buildings the city actually owns, and the ones that were historical at the time of Hoover Dam, and how they're being utilized now, and they're been beautifully maintained. And as you know, we had the LA Water Power Building painted. The water filtration plant is being updated, and hopefully we'll have Bullock Hangar painted, and City Hall, Police Department, Park and Rec. Those are all beautifully maintained. And then the water tank, and it was interesting to me to hear Mr. Hees say that the water tank was actually built at the same time the railroad was. So that was an interesting piece of information. At any rate, this project, the video presentation of the city-owned buildings, would be ready by January. And then I think in this staff report, I personally have written a story on the Browder building, which many of you know we went through a difficult time in Boulder City with the Browder building. We almost lost it. And we had people in the community take an interest, and they bought it, and it's now turned into two beautiful businesses, and I hope that they're doing very well. And I've written an article on the Browder building. It's not quite ready. I still have to do an interview with the owner on how they maintained the actual property and how they kept it historical. So I still have to do that part. So I think Charlie had an article too. Any other comments?
I'm just looking forward to the video that Ray's putting together, what
Yeah,
you and
yeah.
Linda put together. It's just, seen some of the other work he's done done some fun stuff, so hopefully this will be nice and informative for, for the residents of the city.
Yeah, I think it will be. Ray is very creative, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the project looks like too. Okay, any other comments?
No, thank you, Linda.
You're welcome. Okay, we're moving on. For possible action, discussion and update on the status of properties in the historic district and other potentially eligible properties.
is this a good chance to talk about those proposed applications for the National Register of Historic Buildings? At our last meeting, we talked a little bit about that. I know personally, I'm hoping we can get the ball moving on a couple of applications. For me, I would like to see the water filtration plant on there, and also the Ash Street cottages. I talked to the owner of the Ash Street cottages, and they're individually eligible, so.
Did you do a video on that?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I saw that. That was excellent.
Yeah, they're really
Okay.
beautiful. So
Okay.
those are the two that I personally think, I would like to see us go after at least a couple and get the ball moving, and maybe find out what involvement we might have from Courtney Mooney, the consultant, or the Historic Preservation Officer, and costs and that might be associated with that, what we might be looking at.
Okay,
Or if it might be even worthwhile us identifying more than a couple, if it's going to be, within a reasonable budget. If it's gonna cost not much more to do 3, then maybe we might wanna do 3. I don't know how we could find that out, but.
Well, I can certainly find out what the cost would be for that
okay,
and communicate that to the committee.
Great.
Again, going back to priorities, if following the historic preservation plan and providing Courtney's input in the primary goals, including updating the design guidelines, is the highest priority, that would be her focus. But I can certainly get information on that for you for the next meeting.
okay. Thank you. All right, very good. All right, for possible action, committee discussion.
Wait a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Blair, you had something
Sorry.
to say? Sorry. Go ahead.
Item number 6, right?
Yeah, we're on number 6. Uh-huh.
I just wanted to know if, wait, am I in the right? Yeah, did you by chance let Courtney or Northwind know that the SHPO approved their report?
Yes, they were, Courtney was communicated with directly from SHPO.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What?
Yes, she is aware. She received that confirmation from SHPO directly.
Oh, good. Just wanting to make sure. Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right, next item. For possible action, committee discussion regarding potential agenda items for upcoming Historic Preservation Committee meetings. Okay, well, as you know, we're going to have to plan the Historic Preservation Day. It's a little bit early, but I think we probably need to set a date. And I'd like to, next month, I'd like to go ahead and put that on the calendar, because that way we can start talking to individuals that we're going to be asking to speak and so forth, and we'll have a date for that. So if you guys can be thinking about it, let's look at Mother's Day weekend. That's kind of like what we've done in the past, and see if that's going to work out okay. And so let's next month go ahead and set that date. And Ray and I went over a little bit of some of the ideas, and I have some notes that I was in a real creative mood one day having coffee, and I wrote these notes down. So I'll bring my notes next month, and we'll sort of look at that as a framework and kind of start working together, because we're going to have to invite, certain people, and we don't want all the work to be piled up on one person. So, Susan, did you have something?
Just if you've written up notes, send them to us and we'll make sure they're in the packet next month.
Okay, yeah. Well, can I bring them up? I'll have to make copies.
Yeah, if you bring them up, we'll
Okay.
we'll
Yeah, I
just
might have to
scan
look
it.
at them a little differently so that they can be put in a format that'd be for the packet. Okay, good. All right, then I'll get that to you for the packet for next month, because we do need to start thinking about that. We don't want to get away from us. Okay. Any other comments?
Got a possibly for a future agenda, you might need a little guidance here if it's appropriate for us or not to put on the agenda to talk about, but, historic preservation RDA money that, we just approved for this, this past
yeah.
project. I've had some conversations with people and stuff, and, I'm thinking, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about how that money is dispersed, as instead of like one lump sum to one person, can we do, maybe put a cap on it so, more people, more businesses or whatever would be able to access that fund. And also maybe if they're, a little bit tighter of what, if it's coming through historic preservation, our hands are tied, we can only really deal with basically what can be seen from the street. Well, then, my thought would be that then that historic preservation money, would be approved by this body, should just be money that would be applied to the historic preservation that we have some say over. Because, if it's inside the building, whether they do or don't, we don't have any say in that. So my thought is just, and I think maybe we could, a discussion at our next meeting about what we think, and then maybe pass that on to council, for any future changes in how that, historic preservation RDA money is used and distributed. I think that might be a conversation that we should have, as a committee. I'd like to see something like that on the agenda, if that'd be appropriate for us to take on that kind of a thing, or is that out of our, am I reaching too far?
No, I mean, the committee had developed those guidelines to begin with, which is what we took to the city council for adoption. So we can bring those back next month for you to discuss them.
Okay, yeah, so if we can put that on the agenda, do we need to have that said in any kind of a formal way, or or just let
Discussion
Susan know to put it
of the
on?
grant guidelines.
Okay.
Okay,
Yep, we'll add that to the agenda.
I haven't talked to anybody else. I mean, you guys think that's
I think that's fine. I think you're right. I think,
Okay.
we don't want to give the whole lump away. We
Well,
want
I
to,
think,
get it
just-
distributed a little bit further.
Yeah, I think we just need to have a conversation. Let's start with a conversation. Whether it goes someplace or not, I don't know, but let's,
Yeah,
We'll have that on the agenda for next month so you can discuss.
okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
I
All
agree,
right.
Glenn. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. All right, then, we're moving on then to public comment, and. at this-
Wait. I have
Oh,
a
Blair, I'm
potential
sorry, go
agenda
ahead,
item.
go. You have, oh,
She's here.
boy.
Blair's here.
Blair, you're not sitting in your chair, I'm
I know.
sorry. All right, go ahead, I'm
So
sorry.
weird to have this
Yeah,
discombobulated voice in the Ethernet there.
go ahead, go
Um,
ahead.
So I was hoping to maybe bring up at our next meeting a proposal for switching out the front entrance lights there at City Hall, which we just had a really good presentation from a lady who talked about night sky and and light pollution and how we in Boulder City could improve that. And I offered the historic preservation could assist with some of that, perhaps, when it comes to lighting in the historic district. And I would like to start with the City Hall and the two lights that are there at the entrance on each side of the door are just really obnoxious. And I've sent a proposal to Michael, and he did email me and said he'd passed it on to the city manager, and they're going to come up with a cost estimate. But I just thought, maybe have an update on that at our October meeting as far as where the city is on their proposal or their cost estimate, and plus some of the information that I passed along to Michael, which then he passed it along to the city manager. And so anyway, just an update on that.
Okay,
And that's it.
you got it, Michael?
Yeah, and I think that can be part of our regular update and status of properties in the historic district, so that can be part of that agenda item.
Okay, all right, very good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on now to public comment. And public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. To comment during the meeting, members of the public may call 702-589-9629 when the public comment period is open, and it's now open. Yeah. Okay, public comment period is now closed, and for all practical purposes, this meeting is adjourned.
Good night, Blair.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Blair.
everybody.
Night, Blair.
Have a good night.
Take care.